So before we get into our reflection, want to just say on the notice that you got about this event, there's a way to donate. It will help keep us going. We have a very small part-time staff and a few other expenses that really help if we have your donation. So we would appreciate that. Chris, you have a reflection for us.
Yes, good morning and welcome to this day. Just want to take a moment to invite us to pause and just to be aware of our own breathing, to be aware of the gift of breath. Here in our hospital, we are reminded daily about those who are hooked up to machines to breathe. So just take a moment to be aware of your breathing. And I invite us to take another moment just to be aware of our heartbeat, whether you take your pulse or not, just to be aware of that, the gift of this amazing things that happen when we're not thinking, that keeps us alive. And in our hospital, when we reflect on this, we pause to remember our patients who are connected to machines to keep their hearts going or some kind of medicine. So just invite us to take a moment to take some deep breaths about your breath and your heartbeat. As we take a few moments this morning to hear from Tasha and others, we're talking about the death penalty, but at the core of all of this is human beings, united by the same breath and the same heartbeat. The heartbeat of a victim of a violent crime, the heartbeat of the family members that grieve and often are filled with so much anger and pain, the same heartbeat with the person that's sitting on death row for 10 or 20, so many years. One of the gifts of so many of our groups that work together against the death penalty, like California People of Faith and Death Penalty Focus and Catholic Mobilizing, and just so many people along with the Eighth Amendment Project and so many others, is this belief that we're accompanying and coming alongside of human beings, guilty or not. One of the gifts that I find helpful for me is this is a piece of art. I'm trying to get it without so much of the glare, but this is a colored pencil sketch that there's a group of people that help people on death row to create such beauty. Larry Johnson is a person on death row. I have several of his pieces that we often auction off at Death Penalty Focus dinners and other things, but I just bring this piece of art into our circle, and as we go about our day, to realize that even people on death row are beautiful, are human, are breathing, are creative. And some of them will tell you that the tragedy that led them to death row transformed their lives. That life was not all that good before. And that moment happened, and they are doing amazing self-care and trying to pay back to society by helping other inmates. And art is one of those, music is another one. So I just invite us as we go about our day and as we share this conversation together to realize who we are talking about. They're all human beings with breath, with heartbeat, with extended families, with friends, and that together we try to hopefully create more of a justice system and create a way for acknowledging transformed hearts and transformed lives. May our days be filled with breath and heartbeats and continuing our many works for justice.
All right. Steve, would you introduce our guest?
It's my pleasure to welcome and introduce Natasha Minsker. She is a backbone and leader of the anti-death penalty movement in California. She's been singularly at this work for decades, early on for 14 years or more at the ACLU. She's a graduate of Stanford Law School and Cornell University. Currently, she's an attorney and a consultant focusing on the death penalty. I really am so pleased she's with us. I know of nobody more conversant, more committed, more strategic about our statewide effort to end this brutal, inhumane form of punishment. So, Natasha, I'm thrilled that you're here, and please go right ahead.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you all very much for inviting me and joining. It's wonderful to be in this group and see old friends like Father Chris and Steve, who have been also working to end the death penalty in California for decades. It is true. We're not as young as we used to be, but we've made a lot of forward movement. And I'm going to share my screen here. I have about 14 slides. And so let me just get that started. Great. All right. So I'm talking today about the California Clemency Campaign. I am one of the facilitators of the California Anti-Death Penalty Coalition. We are a statewide coalition. We formed when Governor Newsom announced the moratorium on executions, so 6 years ago, and we came together across a wide range of organizations, faith groups, social justice groups, attorneys, and our purpose coming together was to support the governor in the moratorium on executions and to strategize on how to move California towards completely ending the death penalty. Probably most of you remember we have done 2 ballot initiatives to try and completely end the death penalty in California. We came very close both times with 47, 48% of the voters in support, but close doesn't count in ballot initiatives. We have not been able to get over that threshold of 50% support to really repeal the death penalty through a voter initiative. Unfortunately, the legislature is not able to repeal the death penalty because it was enacted by the voters. To formally repeal the death penalty, we must go back to the voters. And so when we look at what other strategies are available to us, one of the most important is commutation of death sentences. And Governor Newsom, being someone who is strongly against the death penalty, presents to us this opportunity to push California forward in terms of ending the death penalty by getting Governor Newsom to commute all death sentences. And so that is what the Clemency California campaign is. We are pushing for universal clemency for all death sentences in California. And I'll go walk through that in detail. If you have questions as I'm going, feel free to raise your hand. I'm happy to have questions and dialogue while I'm talking. We'll also have plenty of time for Q&A after I go through the slides, but either way is fine with me. All right, so what do we mean by universal clemency? Universal clemency means commuting every death sentence, as opposed to taking an individual person-by-person approach. By universal, we mean commute all death sentences at once. This is an action that is taken by an executive, a governor, or a president, and it is based on the systemic concerns regarding the use of the death penalty in all cases. We are asking the governor to address the inhumanity, the fact that the death penalty is a human rights violation that is racially biased as an institution across the board. right? So we're not going through individual cases and saying this person was young, this person has a disability, this person wasn't even the killer. Those facts, those circumstances are present in every single death penalty case. And if you look at each one, you will see there's a story behind every case. There are mitigating factors. There are reasons why this person ended up in the situation they are, and some of them are innocent. But that's not what this is about. It's not about an individual analysis of each case and the mitigating factors or the reasons for clemency in each individual case. This is about the death penalty as a system and about the injustice of the death penalty across the board. And we are asking the governor to act to rid California of death sentences because the death penalty itself is inhumane and an affront to human rights and human dignity. The most recent action by a governor commuting every single death sentence in the state was Governor Kate Brown in Oregon. This is her statement, and you can see that her reasons are based on the flaws with the death penalty system across the board. Now, you probably remember that President Biden, when he left office in December, he commuted almost every federal death sentence. He commuted 37 federal death penalty cases. And that was a historic event that took many people, organizations organizing for years to get President Biden to take that step. From the time he ran for president, the very first time he ran for president, so many years ago, he was asked to make a commitment to commute death sentences. Before he was elected for his actual term as president, he made a commitment that he would move forward with commuting death sentences. For President Biden, this is very much rooted in his faith as a very deeply Catholic person. And still, it was a large campaign and a lot of advocacy to get him to follow through with that commitment and actually commute the death sentences. Now, President Biden's action was not entirely universal because he did leave 3 people behind. He left 3 death sentences in place in cases where people had engaged in what we call mass casualty events that had resulted in a large number of individuals being injured or killed. And so while we're really grateful for President Biden's action and it was historic, it wasn't in fact a universal action because he left out 3 people. And it's really was unfortunately inconsistent in that way. If you are taking action on death sentences because of the inherent problems with the death penalty, then to be consistent, you must commute all death sentences, which is exactly what Kate Brown did in Oregon. There are other governors. There have been 6 governors in the history of the United States over the course of 100 years. 6 governors have commuted every single death sentence they were presented with. And other governors, similar to President Biden, have commuted a large number or specific categories. So why should Governor Newsom grant universal clemency? Governor Newsom has been our most vocal messenger for what's wrong with the death penalty in California. He knows quite well that the death penalty is inhumane, racially biased, that there are innocent people on death row. And he knows that this isn't about individual cases, but about a system that is never going to be just and is just simply at its core inhumane and inconsistent with human rights. We as a coalition ask that the governor act on universal clemency to be consistent with what he said in his moratorium order, right? So when the governor put the moratorium on executions in place early in his term, he was elected and took office in 2016. And one of the first things he did was move forward with the moratorium on executions, which he put in place on March 13th of 2016. And these are the reasons that he cited in his moratorium order. We are told that when Governor Newsom became governor, he felt very profoundly the weight of potential executions and people's lives in his hands. Immediately from becoming governor, there were people who had exhausted all their appeals. And if California was actively carrying out executions, he would immediately be confronted with the possibility of being the last person to decide whether a person would live or die. And he felt very profoundly the weight of that, and that he did not want to have that hanging over his head or have to worry about that possibility based on variances in litigation, et cetera. And so it was very important for the governor for the moratorium on executions to be one of the first things he did. See, there's something in the chat, just wanting to check if that was a question. Oh, great. Thank you, Father Chris, for posting that. Okay, moving on. What's happening here? There we go. Word about the process. So Governor Newsom can unilaterally on his own commute any sentence if the person has no separate felony conviction from another case, right? So you have one case, you could have multiple charges, you could have multiple homicide charges in that one case. But if everything was tried together, you only had one trial and you were convicted once for everything, then that's a case that the governor has the power to commute their sentence. But if an individual has a felony conviction from any separate case from the case, let's say the death penalty case in this circumstance, then the governor has to send his recommendation for commutation to the California Supreme Court, and a majority of the justices on the California Supreme Court, or 4 justices out of 7, must approve his act. So I could, for example, be sentenced to death in what we call a felony murder situation, a situation where I and another person may have robbed a store and the other person may have killed someone. I could be sentenced to death because of that other person's act. That might be the only reason I'm on death row. If I have a separate felony conviction, let's say I had a small drug sale felony conviction from when I was 18, because of that separate felony conviction, then the governor cannot commute my death sentence all on his own. Because of that, my case would be one that would have to go to the California Supreme Court. So I make this point for a couple of reasons. One, our goal is everyone, and the governor's goal is to act on the death penalty across the board, right? We are trying to get every death sentence commuted. And the governor himself only has power over approximately 1/3 of the people with death sentences are in this situation where they have no other felony conviction. So approximately 2/3 of the cases will have to go to the California Supreme Court, and they will review the governor's request to move forward with commutation. That division, even though it might seem like it's based on an objective factor, whether they have a separate felony conviction, in fact, it's really not based on the circumstances of the case. Some of the people whose cases must go to the Supreme Court have very relatively mitigated facts in their case, whereas other people that the governor has power over their sentence and commute unilaterally, they may have more extreme facts. And so this is, again, one of the things that's unfair about our system, is that there's no logic to who the governor can commute by himself and who must go to the Supreme Court. It's really not based on fact-specific circumstances, but it leaves us in a situation when we're campaigning for universal clemency, we have to factor into our advocacy that the governor does not act alone, that in order to get everyone's death sentence commuted, we must know that the Supreme Court is part of this process. Now, the justice's job is not to put themselves in the governor's shoes. It's not to decide if they would do the same as the governor. Their job is to simply review the commutation for abuse of power. The issue is the governor commuting this death sentence because it's a friend, because it's his, frat brother's son? Is this some grant of special privilege that's not based on legitimate factors, right? So the Supreme Court justices, their role is limited. And we believe very strongly that if the governor acts to commute all death sentences based on problems with the death penalty and the racial bias and injustices inherent in the death penalty, that is absolutely within the governor's power. And it's not granting a special privilege to someone based on connections, for example. But we still have to make that case to the Supreme Court. Last point in the process is that there's also a requirement in statute that the Board of Parole hearing review every case before the governor acts on commutation. The role of the Board of Parole hearing, again, they're not making a recommendation to the governor. They are not putting themselves in the governor's shoes. They're required by statute to review every case before commutation and to produce what's called a risk assessment. If this individual poses a particular risk, which is really based on whether or not they're going to be released back into the community. So we have to be aware that this is a somewhat complicated process in California, right? Governor Brown in Oregon, President Biden, they had the power to act on their own with none of this process and to do commutations for all the death sentences in their power just through stroke of the pen and the ability to act at any time. Governor Newsom has to contend with these procedural issues. And so this is not something he can or should do in December of his last term. This is something that requires him to act well in advance of the end of his term so that we have time to go through all of these procedural steps. Now let's turn to talking about the death penalty, right? So what are some basic facts about California's death penalty? There are about 570 people on California's death row. So as of today, it's 573 people sentenced to death in California. When the governor put the moratorium in place in 2016, we had 744 people sentenced to death in California. So we have, over the course of 6 years, made remarkable progress in reducing the number of people with death sentences in California. There are a lot of things that have contributed to that. Unfortunately, there have been significant deaths. There were significant deaths during the COVID pandemic. But there have also been great actions by district attorneys. The Los Angeles District Attorney, George Gascon, he was able to get 30 people resentenced and removed from death sentences. Here in the north, the Santa Clara District Attorney, Jeff Rosen, got 14 people resentenced through his own requests. And we have seen individual actions, less high profile, less public, but district attorneys agreeing to resentence in individual cases and more cases reversed. In Alameda County, DA Price, who was a very progressive district attorney, but she was really forced into reevaluating death penalty cases because an attorney in her office disclosed notes in jury selection cases covering 30 or 40 years, jury selection cases and death penalty cases where the notes showed that the Alameda County prosecutors were intentionally removing from death penalty juries Black people and Jewish people, LGBT community members, because the prosecutors did not think they would reliably vote for death. And revealing this systemic bias in jury selection led to the Alameda County District Attorney Pam Price agreeing to resentence 20 individuals who had been sentenced to death in Alameda County, and there are more cases under review. So that still leaves us, even though we've made this remarkable progress, even though we're seeing death sentences come down one by one and great DAs like Gascon take significant action, we still have the largest death row in the country by far. Someone last night said to me, if you combine the death row of Texas, Alabama, and Florida, you could put those death rows all together and California would still have more. We have one of the largest death rows in the world. We would rank 5th if we were a nation state in terms of the size of our death row in the world. There are about 2,000 people sentenced to death in the United States. So that means 25% of the death sentences of this entire country are California death sentences. Most of those people have been there for more than 20 years. Some of them have been there for 40 years. Most of them do not have lawyers to litigate their case. Some people have been waiting 30 years or more for a lawyer to be appointed to review their case. And so the system is broken on every level. I don't think you're going to be surprised to know that most people sentenced to death in California are people of color. 1/3 of them are Black. Latino individuals are also overrepresented. Native American individuals are overrepresented on California's death row. Almost half of them were young, were under the age of 26 when they committed their offense. And if you look at the people who are under age 26, they are overwhelmingly people of color, especially Black and Latino. And this is important. In California, we have made several reforms to our laws around recognizing that people who are under 26 have not the same brain development that the rest of us do. That when you're under 26, your brain is still developing, in particular, the parts of your brain that control impulse control, susceptibility to peer pressure, and the ability to do moral reasoning. Those are the key parts of your brain that are still developing between the age of 18 and 25. Recognizing that, California has reformed our laws in several ways so that people who are sentenced to life in prison for a homicide that happened when they were under 25, they were 25 or under, those individuals have an opportunity to be reconsidered and reviewed by the parole board earlier in recognition of how young they were at the time they were involved in the offense. Those reforms do not apply to young people who were sentenced to death. So just because they came from a county that chose to sentence them to death, in another county, they might have received a life sentence and might actually be eligible for release based on consideration of their young age at the time of the offense. But here, because they've been sentenced to death, they get no consideration at all. More than 1/3 of the people with the death sentence in California have a serious mental illness. And being sentenced to death, the conditions of being sentenced to death greatly aggravates people's disabilities and particularly their mental illness. Racial bias is one of the most significant problems with our death penalty in California and across the United States. So for the history of the United States, the death penalty is deeply rooted in the American history of slavery. Our first death penalty laws in the United States were race-based laws. Black people, people who were being held in slavery, were executed and sentenced to death for things that were not even crime for white people. And it's the intertwined history of lawful judicial executions with extra lawful lynching and mob terror, resulting in mobs executing people. These things are all intertwined. And the death penalty in the United States, really in the 1900s, the death penalty was, the legal death penalty process was unfortunately promoted as a way to respond to mob racial terror. And lawyers, academics, politicians actually advocated for the legal death penalty system as a way to, in their minds, end lynching, because we would have the judicial process addressing people's concerns and desire for vengeance. So it's really is, the death penalty is a continuation of this deeply racist history with roots in the American slavery system, and is just rotten at the core. On the side of the screen, you can see the actual data and statistics. There have been now decades of studies on California's death penalty in particular, showing over and over again racial disparities in how the death penalty is applied in California, particularly with regard to Black and Latino people. As I said, Native American people are also overrepresented, but they are a smaller number of people overall, and so the studies are not able to come back with statistically significant findings. With Black and Latino individuals, we have multiple studies showing over and over again statistically significant findings of racial disparities in how the death penalty law is applied in California. Right now, we have a case pending at the California Supreme Court that challenges our death penalty based on racial bias in how it is administered, saying that this violates the state constitution equal protection clause. So in the beginning, I told you the only way we can legally repeal the death penalty in California, the entire system, the statute and everything, and get rid of the death penalty completely, the only way we can repeal it is by an initiative of the voters. The second path for getting rid of the death penalty statute in California is if the California Supreme Court finds that it's unconstitutional under our state constitution. And that is what this case at the California Supreme Court is seeking to do. It's been there, sitting there for a year, more than a year. And right now the California Supreme Court has it on hold while they consider a separate case with a technical procedural issue. The California Supreme Court does not have to accept this case. It's up to them. It's discretionary whether they take it or not take it. And we're just waiting to see what they do. I'm sure you all know also one of the biggest problems with the death penalty across this country is innocence, right? Innocent people who have been wrongfully sentenced to death, innocent people who have been executed in this country. This is Shuja Graham. He's one of our amazing advocates, and he is one of 8 people who have been exonerated from a death sentence in California. All 8 people who have been exonerated in California were men of color. But there are many more people sentenced to death or still in prison who previously had death sentences who are innocent. As I told you, half the people with a death sentence don't have a lawyer. And so there's no one to advocate for them and produce the evidence of their innocence. The Orange County Register recently reported Kenneth Clare. He's been in prison for 40 years. He was originally sentenced to death, and now he's serving a life without parole sentence and still in prison. And DNA evidence just this year shows that he did not commit the crime, but matches with someone else. And yet he's still in prison, and he's got an attorney, right? So we know that there are innocent people who've been sentenced to death in California and who are still in prison, who are not getting the help they need. You all are people of faith. I don't think dollars are the main motivation, but it is important to know that California's death penalty is enormously costly. So how would we fix that problem that half the people with a death sentence don't have lawyers? What would it cost us? The National Conference of Chief Justices told the U.S. Supreme Court it would cost $600 million more than we have already paid to give a lawyer to everyone who needs one in California with a death sentence. This was in a case that's at the U.S. Supreme Court around a procedural issue. It's just notable that it was the National Conference of Chief Justices. They represent all the chief justices from all the states in the country. And this is their quote for how much it would cost to provide people with lawyers. Obviously, much better things California can do with those dollars. The views of survivors. So California's death penalty has touched the lives of more than 1,000 people who have lost a loved one to murder, well more than 1,000. That is a widely diverse group of people. Some of them have been against the death penalty from the beginning, and their views were not considered by the prosecution. The prosecution went forward with seeking the death penalty anyway. Some of them wanted the death penalty in the beginning, and since then have realized that it is a terribly broken system that is just hollow promises to them. You know, district attorneys seeking the death penalty will tell victims' families, we're going to execute this person. We're going to, quote, do this for you. And what actually happens in reality is decades of litigation and no effort to address the actual needs of the victims' families. So I have here some quotes from Bethany Webb. Bethany is, I think, still on the board of Death Penalty Focus, works with Steve and Father Chris, has been a really outspoken advocate for ending the death penalty. Her sister, this is daughter actually, her sister and mother were involved in the mass shootings. Her sister was killed and her mother was injured in the Seal Beach mass shootings. And that case ultimately ended in a life without parole sentence. But the district attorney of Orange County for a long time was seeking the death penalty over the objections of the survivors' families. All right, this is my last slide, and then we'll talk. So what can you do? You can join us. I will put these links in the chat here in a minute. So our general website is clemencyca.org. We have a general petition there that anyone is welcome to sign. It's a simple one-sentence statement saying, we urge Governor Newsom, we urge you to commute all death sentences now. Don't wait. So we ask everyone to sign that, and we are also asking organizations to endorse that. You, ICUJP, have already joined and endorsed that position, so thank you very much. And I heard that you are all involved in other organizations. You can absolutely ask other organizations you're part of to join us and sign this petition. Right now we have 187 organizations have signed on in support. We'd love to get that over 200 organizations, as well as individuals may sign this petition. And then we also have a faith leader specific letter, which we ask you to join and to ask you are welcome to share this with other people you work with and ask them to join. The goal of the faith leader letter, we have about 45 individual faith leaders on the letter now. We'd like to get as many faith leaders signed on as we can, and then we will present this letter directly to the governor in early September. The picture that's here, this is from an event we did just 2 weeks ago, June 26th. We gathered in Sacramento with civil rights leaders. And so we had a contingent of civil rights leaders. We did a press event in Sacramento, and then we met with the governor's office, met with his highest level staff, not the governor himself, but his senior staff, and urged that he move forward with commuting death sentences now. Steve and Father Chris, you'll recognize Linda in the back of that picture. And then the last way you can get involved, Steve, I see your hand, I'll turn to you in just a second. Last thing that's coming up in September, the San Francisco Opera will be doing the Dead Man Walking opera. And the premiere is on September 14th. Sister Helen Prejean will be in San Francisco from September 10th through the 14th, and there will be a series of events around the death penalty. We will share all the details for that, but to let you know now that on September 10th, there'll be a panel discussion involving faith leaders, advocates, and attorneys, and Sister Helen. That will be on September 10th at 7 p.m. at the City Arts and Lectures event space in San Francisco. And then Sister Helen will do an event on Friday, the 12th. She'll do an event in the middle of the day at the San Francisco Library. And then the opera opens on the 14th. Tickets just went on sale this week. So if you are interested in seeing the Dead Man Walking opera, you can also get tickets for the opening event, which is on Sunday, the 14th at 2 p.m. So I'm going to stop the share now, and then we can have discussion. And I'll put these links in the chat also. Steve.
Well, Natasha, this is just a graduate course in the death penalty. I'm so grateful this program is recorded. I know there are scores of people who will want to hear it because it is the single most current, up-to-date summary of the death penalty and all of its flaws. I'm going to take the liberty of asking a few questions, which may be on other people's minds as well, and then we'll open that up. First of all, there are a variety of terms that people use: commutation, clemency, pardon, and I often have to go back to notes to remember the differences, and they may have some relevance to everything you're talking about. So could you break down the categories and subcategories between clemency, commutation, and pardons?
Yes. Okay. Good question. So clemency is the broad category of the governor acting within his or her power, a grant of mercy to a person in the criminal justice system. Commutation is the more specific term that applies to changing someone's criminal sentence. So when we commute a sentence, when a governor or president commutes a sentence, they are changing the sentence from, for example, the death penalty to, it could be life without parole or a life sentence. That is a commutation of sentence. The pardon is different. Pardon is where we are essentially wiping out the criminal conviction completely. And that is where we're saying, we are recognizing the governor, president, we're recognizing you may have been convicted of this offense, or you were convicted of this offense, you may have committed it, but because of redemption, changes in your life, we are going to pardon you and completely remove, basically wipe out that criminal conviction as though it had never happened, right? So glad you're asking this question, Steve. So what we are asking for is the governor to commute death sentences. We're not asking for pardons. We're not asking for people to be released. We are asking for him specifically to get rid of the death penalty and to commute those sentences to something else. What's the something else? Practically speaking, the governor is, if he acts on universal clemency, he will commute death sentences to life without parole. Because if he takes that universal action, not based on individual factors, just acting based on the death penalty across the board, he's not going to be looking at every individual case to decide what's the appropriate sentence. He will get rid of the death penalty and convert their sentences to life without possibility of parole. Now, we as a coalition, many of our organizations and individuals do not believe life without parole is an appropriate sentence, right? Many of us believe that life without parole is a form of death in prison. So we don't advocate for commuting death sentences to life without parole. We advocate for the governor to commute death sentences. We also advocate for him to leave open the possibility for an individual clemency process. So people who've had their change, if he does act to change a death sentence to life without parole, that he's not closing the door on those individuals, that it's still possible that they could request individualized assessment of their case and potentially later be commuted to a life sentence. It's also true that many people who have had their cases reconsidered by district attorneys have been able to get a sentence changed from death to life without parole, and then later to a life sentence. So we do our advocacy in a way that we're trying to get rid of all death sentences at once, recognizing that that means those cases will be changed to life without parole, while keeping open paths for individuals who have their death sentence changed to life without parole, keeping open paths for them to later potentially get their sentence changed to life with parole based on the individual factors in their case.
And staying on that topic, because I know it's of great interest to many here, internationally, life without parole is a pariah. Other countries have either definite sentence, a number of years, or there's a period of time, and then the individual is allowed to seek release based on rehabilitation and other factors. Are there states in the U.S. That have adopted that, I'll call it a European model, or that have life with the possibility of parole?
There are no states that have completely gotten rid of life without parole in the US, but I believe my understanding is that Maryland is the state that has gone the furthest in that they have said that if an individual was under the age of 26 when they were sentenced to life without the possibility of parole, then they are in fact given an opportunity for reconsideration and to actually get parole. So effectively, my understanding is that Maryland is the most advanced state in that they have said that we won't, practically speaking, have life without parole for people who are under 26 at the time of the offense.
And staying on your campaign now, it sounds as if because of the level of review that the Board of Parole hearings involves, the universality of the movement will become individualized when the cases reach the Board of Parole hearings. So there's far more, you're talking at the first level, what the governor can do with the Supreme Court, but still all the cases will require individualized review by the Board of Parole hearings?
Actually, no. Great question, Steve. So actually, our position is legally, if the governor is seeking to commute death sentences and what he is doing is converting to life without parole based only on issues with the death penalty in particular, that even though all of this process has to go to the Board of Parole hearing, there's actually nothing for them to do, because legally in the statute, their job is to determine if there is a risk to public safety if the governor moves forward with his action. Here, if the governor is changing death sentences to life without parole and no one is going to be released because of this universal action, there is nothing for them to do. There's no risk to public safety. So our position, we will say to the board, and we believe the governor will say the same thing, is that even though legally we have to send this to you to review, what the board should do appropriately is say, because no one is being released as a result of this action, there is no risk to public safety and there's no need to go through these cases one at a time. If they have to go through the cases one at a time, this will take years. So, again, it goes to why we are campaigning now, trying to get the governor to act soon, because to Steve's point, that's our argument, but we need it to move forward and actually make that case to the board, and it could easily be challenged in court. So we're urging the governor to act soon so that these legal issues can be addressed.
And to reinforce that, that question of risk to public safety would come up if a life with parole process was in place. So you could reassure the board that universal clemency will not result in mass release of these 500 inmates, and that board can serve its statutory function later if, as, and when individual cases come to them to consider the risk to public safety.
That is exactly right. That's exactly right, Steve. That's the goal.
And my last question on this round, because now hands are beginning to be raised, that process of going to the California Supreme Court, for 2/3 of the inmates, because you're framing it in a universal systemic sense, you are hoping that the Supreme Court could adopt a summary proceeding, look at what the governor's announcement, I'm sure there would be a governor's statement that would accompany his universal clemency, and that the court would likewise treat it at that high universal level. And you pointed out it's an abuse of process standard. And did he have grounds for a systemic decision?
Exactly right. And it also goes back to the most ancient roots of the clemency power. So the concept of clemency, it is rooted in, because our laws come from British legal system, right? So originally it was very core. It was the idea that the king can commute any sentence. And it's the power of the king to grant mercy. And that is what clemency is at its core, that the executive can say, all right, you may have done something wrong. This entire judicial process may have come to the conclusion that death is the legally appropriate and just sentence. But I, as the executive, always have the prerogative to choose mercy. And that's the very original use of commutation, was by a king to grant mercy to someone who is facing execution. And so part of the argument to the Supreme Court is, this is not an abuse of power by an executive. This is the original purpose of executive clemency, is to choose life and to choose mercy over death.
My footnote quickly, I took my hand down, but is the governor's clemency power expressed in the California Constitution, or is it a common law right?
It's in the Constitution, and that's where this requirement to go to the Supreme Court for certain cases is in the Constitution. Right, I see Ipiani. I hope I'm saying that close to correct.
No, you did an excellent job, and thank you for this insightful presentation. I know topics such as this are, speaking for myself, I struggle with this aspect of it, even though I advocated work with people that have been blessed to be released off the lifers and things of that nature, but being directly impacted by my brother's best friend being murdered is just, it's a struggle for some, and I admit that is a struggle for myself. But my question for you is that, you know, you're a lawyer. That's definitely a coveted skill set, and I imagine you have many of opportunities where you can go and practice law in a way that's more lucrative for yourself. So I'm wondering, what led you to apply your amazing skill set in this arena, in this regard?
For that question, thank you for sharing your personal experience, Ipiani. I know this is a very heavy topic. We're talking about, you know, serious offenses and lost life, and every single one of the death penalty cases has a tragic story that is involved in that case. So I appreciate your struggle, and thank you for sharing that. So I came to the death penalty work very early when I was a law student. I was my first summer law internship. I went to the public defender's office in Alameda County. And my first experience with the death penalty was our very first day. They were walking us around the courtrooms, and they said, oh, there's a death penalty trial going on. Let's go in and watch. And so we sat down, and at the time, the man whose life was being judged, whose life was on trial, essentially his mother, the woman who raised him from a child, was on the stand. And the defense lawyer said, Mrs. Jones, how would you feel if the state of California were to kill your son? And I just felt at that moment, this is profoundly wrong in every possible way. There is no way a legal system can legitimately choose to kill another person to decide who deserves to live and who deserves to die. We, as human beings and as a legal system, we will never, quote, get that right. That is not a power we should have. And from there, when I graduated law school, I went to work at the public defender's office in the death penalty defense unit. And I worked only on death penalty cases, and I saw firsthand how traumatic this entire process is to everyone involved. It is not something that people should do, should go to work and argue that a person should die for a prosecutor. It is not something a person should have to do, to go to work and fight to save a life, and for us all to be pantomiming that this is a legitimate thing for the law to do. It's deeply traumatic for every person involved, and just wrong. And then I went to clerk for a judge, and that judge had the largest federal death penalty case going on, and seeing the ridiculous overreach of the government, the prosecutorial misconduct in that case was enormous. And again, all of us working on the case, it weighed on every person. I was working for the judge, and it weighed on everyone in chambers in this deep, deep way. And just, this is a process that is harmful and traumatic to everyone involved, and goes far beyond what human beings should be allowed to do, and makes our entire legal system, I think, calls into question the legitimacy of everything we do.
Thank you.
Daniel. Yeah, thank you for the question, Evgeny.
Yeah, Daniel Tan, thank you, Natasha. This was wonderful. I'm so happy to see Clemency, California moving forward. I had a privilege of being a coordinator in Southern California for Yes on 34. And my fiercest volunteers were nuns. And so, I just want to, when we get back to this campaign, call up the convents first thing. That's the first order of business. Yeah, I mean, who's going to say no, to a very quick story. Sister Helen Prejin met with us in Southern California, to a number of us who were working on the campaign, and we were conferring and, in huddled down in this very serious conversation. And right in the middle of it, she stopped what was going on. She said, "Hey, have you heard this one?" And she told this joke, and it was this uproarious joke, and we all just burst out laughing. And she said, "See, you can have fun while you're working for justice." And then we went on.
Well, Daniel, thank you for that story. Thank you for your work. I thought your name looked familiar, and I was trying to think, when did I work with Daniel? So thank you for working on this issue for so long. Sister Helen will be at the opening night of the opera. So, I know some of you I was surprised how many of you are actually in Northern California, but if even your folks in LA, if you want to have an excuse to come to San Francisco and watch the opera with Sister Helen being present, it's a great opportunity, and potentially enjoying some of the other events she'll be at.
It was a really instructive moment. It was a real teaching moment for all of us. And I've carried that ever since in every campaign. So thank you.
That's great. That's great. Swanje?
Yeah, you basically focus on the two steps of the governor being able to do the clemency, and then also the people could repeal the death penalty. But there's also at least one third thing that we would have to review when or if police officers can use deadly force. So that's basically preempting the death penalty. They making the judgment to kill people.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I do a lot of lobbying in Sacramento on criminal justice issues generally, and we have worked very hard to reform our use of force laws in California. A few years ago, before George Floyd was killed and murdered, the California law on police use of force, not that long ago, it said police can kill someone legally for simply refusing to follow their orders. It was written in 1870s and had not been changed for more than 100 years. And it was a very large campaign to get that law updated. It's still not perfect. And what we're seeing right now is that the attention in this country and the world on racism and systemic racial bias involving law enforcement has waned, right? We had our moment when people cared after George Floyd was murdered. And in the last few years, there's just been less and less attention. And the police are trying to undo a lot of the progress we have made in the legislature right now. So what we're doing right now is trying to stop the police from reversing course on a lot of the reforms we passed. So we absolutely need everyone's help to stay engaged with everything that's happening in Sacramento. You all are in Los Angeles. You're in the heart of the federal takeover, and the fact that you have troops and local police aiding the troops in what's a seizure of the city of Los Angeles, right? So you see right now what abuse of power by law enforcement looks like. You've seen it for a while, but you're living it every day. So we really do need to keep standing up to the law enforcement and working to, at a minimum, maintain the changes we've made, but there's much more work that's needed. Randall?
Good morning, Natasha. I apologize that I was only able to join a little bit late this morning, and I may have to leave early, so I wanted to make sure that I have some of the dates for these events, and especially for the letter that's going to go to the governor in my notes here. I took the opportunity while you were talking to go ahead and sign on as a supporter of the letter. And I think I can find some fertile ground here at All Saints to do so with other members. And so I just wanted to make sure that I had the dates properly. If you could repeat those for me.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Yes. So our goal, we would like faith leaders to join the sign-on letter by September 10th. So that relates to, our plan is to give the sign-on letter from faith leaders to the governor while Sister Helen is in San Francisco. We don't know yet if we can get the governor to actually show up to one of the events, but we are trying. He's from San Francisco. He lives in Marin. It's not that hard. Maybe it will come. But either way, we want the letter ready to present to the governor on September 10th. And if we can't get the governor personally, one of his staff to receive it from Sister Helen at one of the events. So again, to recap those events, what's planned right now is on September 10th in the evening, there'll be a panel discussion. It will be interfaith, faith leaders from a variety of traditions with Sister Helen on one panel, and then a second panel with advocates and attorneys talking about the death penalty. And then on September 12th, Sister Helen will do an event at the San Francisco Library in their big auditorium there. That'll be a midday event featuring Sister Helen. And then the opera opening night is September 14th. I should say opening afternoon. It's a 2 p.m. performance on September 14th. So we may do also a press event in those days. And so that's our goal, is to get as many faith leaders signed on by September 14th. And for the organization endorsement, we're going to continue to gather endorsements. We gave the governor's staff the list as it was by June 26, which was 187 groups. But we want to keep adding more and more names to that. And we will deliver it to the governor as we get to our kind of next increments, like over 200, over 250.
I want to add that as an ally, ICUJP will be pushing out these dates, announcing the events. When this recording is posted, Rick adds materials and links to the sign-on letter, and we'll get the best links to the events that you're talking about, Natasha. So folks will get that here. It'll always be on our website, and closer to into late July and August, we'll re-announce all of the September events that you're talking about. If I'm the next hand, there's
I do see a couple questions in the chat.
Oh,
Should
do that. Yeah, 'cause I was going to repeat Chris's question, but you go ahead.
So Don's asking, will we save $600 million? Yes. If the governor commutes death sentences, we will avoid spending $600 million on lawyers at a minimum. And I really want to emphasize one of the things we're saying to the governor is very well aware that the federal Republican government has cut funding for victim services. The cut to California specifically is $173 million. So again, the federal Republican government has cut funding for victim services in California by $173 million. That money goes to rape crisis hotlines, to domestic violence shelters, to child victim centers. It's the most important part of our public safety system. It is helping victims who are at an immediate crisis, at immediate risk of violence, and who need immediate help. And the Republican federal government took that money away. So when we talk about what does it mean to save $600 million and not spend that money on lawyers for people with death sentences, that's money that we could choose to spend on victim services and really be a critical advancement for public safety in California. Now, Father Chris, right, you raised that big elephant in the room, or maybe it's the big donkey in the room, that Governor Newsom is running for president. That's clear. He went to South Carolina this week. He can't even pretend that there's a legitimate reason for the California governor to go to South Carolina. He's absolutely running for president. So if we had a governor who was ready to retire, who was going to walk away, this would be a much easier campaign politically. But we don't. We have a governor who's aiming for higher office, and that's why we have to do all this work. Honestly, if it was just Governor Newsom walking out the door, we'd be writing legal briefs, but we wouldn't need to do a public campaign for him. We need this public campaign. We need this showing of support from faith leaders and civil rights leaders and the larger community, so that the governor sees that him following his heart and doing the right thing and taking an act for justice will be met with applause, that it will be a welcome act, that people will stand up and say, that's what we want our leaders to do. The faith community is really important in this, because the faith community across the country is one of the ways we get across the conservative, progressive, Democrat, Republican divide on this issue. You know, we have many faith communities, particularly in other states, less so in California, but many faith communities that are conservative that stand with us against the death penalty. And so one of the messages to the governor is that diverse faith communities across the country will applaud him and will thank him if he does this. Steve, back to you.
Yeah, thank you. And I'll give way to anybody else who raises their hand. So let's broaden this, and it's right where you are. We have about 20 more minutes or so. How do we convince a public? So twice we, by a few percentage points, lost those initiatives. We're confronted with a law and order federal president. Is this an opportunity in campaigning for universal clemency and, frankly, eventually for abolition, that there are better ways to achieve public safety in this state and in this country than to kill people? And isn't this, and can you expand on the kinds of arguments that will, empower everybody on this screen and everybody watching this video when they talk to their their uncle, their friend, their colleague. Unfortunately, Chris Panett stepped away, but he coined the idea of resistance at the water cooler. Every Monday, people go to work after the weekend and they congregate around the metaphorical water cooler anymore. But the point is, you have opportunities in life, in work, in community, in family, to talk about the death penalty. And we are this close to that tipping point in a public policy issue of convincing a majority of Californians, and you've touched on some of this, but where do you see the resistance to adopting abolition or universal clemency in today's atmosphere? And is there a possibility that the cruelty and the brutality of the Trump administration is actually an opening to say that the death penalty is part and parcel of that kind of cruelty that he is visiting upon vulnerable communities? And surely one vulnerable community are people in our own custody that we purport to judge and kill. So I'm giving you an open space to address some of those issues.
Yeah, great question, Steve. So a couple different points. One, with this issue, with this work, it's really important to recognize, as we were saying before, that there is a lot of pain involved in these cases. That, you know, for an individual who is for the death penalty or who's struggling with the death penalty, often it's just rooted in the pain and the trauma of violence in the community, violence they may have experienced, the loss of a loved one close to them. And we've had the death penalty as long as we've had people, right? The desire to respond to that trauma and to that pain by responding with, well, that person's lost their right to live, right? That is a very ancient and deeply rooted feeling, right? So we should not judge the feeling. We should really say, we understand the feeling, we understand the trauma, and the question is, where are we today? And does it actually achieve the healing, the sense of responding to your pain that the individual is seeking? And we know the answer to that is no, right? We know that, in fact, our society, our legal system, but our society generally is terrible about addressing the needs of victims. We are terrible about addressing trauma. And really, you know, Daniel mentioned restorative justice. We have only recently started to ask in limited ways, what do victims really need? What will help them heal, right? Nothing's going to bring back the lost loved one. Nothing is going to fix it. But what is going to acknowledge their pain and help deal with the practical realities that they're living through and help them heal and move forward? And we rarely ask that question, right? Most of us who've not been touched by violent crime, we turn away and we compartmentalize and we don't want to deal with it. And as a society, we have used victims. We've used victims politically to advance different causes, but we don't actually put the needs of the victims first. And we don't actually say, how can we help them? The budget that just passed here in California, it has a small backfill to address that cut that I mentioned from the federal government. But overall this year, funding for victim services will go down in California, right? And as much as politicians talk about, we got to put the victims first, they are not actually doing that. So I think it's really important for us to raise that up and say, we need to do more for victims. We need to actually have a system that prevents violence, that addresses mental health, that addresses substance use, that addresses poverty, right? What are the core causes of violence in our community? mental health issues, substance use abuse, poverty. We need to address those issues to prevent violence. And when it happens, we need to actually focus on the needs of victims. Now, I also do believe, as you're saying, Steve, that right now, the way the federal government and Trump are becoming a dictatorship, are what we are seeing in terms of authoritarianism and the end of democracy in this country, Trump and his ilk, their love of the death penalty is all tied up with that, right? That the death penalty is part of authoritarianism. It is how a dictator exercises power. Trump believes he has the right to decide who lives and who dies. He believes that he is king and that he should have that power, right? And that is a threat to all of us. And the death penalty is always going to be part of, tied up in authoritarianism. It is simply a power that no individual, that no government should have. I also think the faith message is really critically important, right? And I think from talking to people about what is that human connection, right? What is that inherent human dignity? Every faith tradition that you are all part of, part of your faith tradition in different ways is recognizing universal humanity and recognizing that we are all bonded together by our humanity, and that extends to each one of us, no matter what we have done, right? Sister Helen Prejean, Brian Stevenson, these leaders in our movement all say, each one of us is more than the worst thing we have done. And if our lives were judged on the worst thing we have done, none of us would fare well, right? But that is what it means to recognize universal human dignity. And what bonds us is that we make mistakes. We all have stories. We have things that led us to make errors. I am a lucky and blessed person to live the life I live. And, a few blocks away, people are living in poverty, right? I don't know their reality, but my task as a human is to learn their reality and to understand and bring compassion. And I think that message of faith is really important in our work on the death penalty. Carol Francis.
Could you give us examples of what countries who have gotten rid of the death penalty and what the effect on their crime rates that we could use?
Yes. So the death penalty has been abolished in most of the world, right? So practically speaking, the death penalty is being used in a few Middle Eastern countries, Saudi Arabia, Iran, a couple of African countries, but most of all of Latin America, most of Europe have gotten rid of the death penalty. Some of Asia still has the death penalty. China, even Japan still has the death penalty. But what you find, particularly looking at comparing Europe with the United States, the violence rate in the United States is much higher than it is in Europe. And certainly countries that have gotten rid of the death penalty have seen no correlation with an increase in violence. You all probably know this, right? But a lot of what drives the rate of violence in the United States is that we have more guns than any other country in the world, right? And so there's the strongest correlation between the rate of violence in a state within the United States is the number of guns they have and the strength of their gun safety laws. And so when you look at, in the United States, when you look at states that have the death penalty, that carry out executions, and you compare them to states that do not carry out executions, the rates of violence are much higher in the executing states. And those also tend to be states that have more guns and fewer gun safety laws, right? So in California, our violent crime rate, the decrease in violent crime has been decreasing over years, and it is strongly correlated with having stronger gun safety laws. So long way of saying the death penalty is not making us any safer anywhere. Gun safety laws do make us safer. Yanni.
Yes. currently, well, last year I had the blessing to present in this space around Proposition 6, which is trying to remove voluntary servitude or slavery from the California State Constitution. I frame it, I say that to say, we are well aware that outside of Los Angeles County and, Alameda County, San Francisco Bay Area, we live in a very conservative or extremely conservative state, right? So I'm wondering, how do you present this information from the lens of conservative, fiscal conservatives, right? Because we have to acknowledge that they are voters too, and how can we craft our message to resonate and hopefully move them to action? How do you go presenting that?
Yeah, that's an excellent point, and Biani, it was such a terrible tragedy to have that initiative fail, and thank you for your work on it. I will mention that the California Reparations Task Force has the reparations on to address the legacy of slavery in California, has said that abolition of the death penalty is one of their top recommendations. And one of the members of the task force was at our presentation 2 weeks ago in Sacramento. And to your question, how do we talk about this with people who are more conservative? Well, that's why I mentioned the cost issue. Even in a group like this of faith leaders, it's important for us to be fluent and have ways of speaking with people who don't share our traditions and our faith or all of our values. And California has spent $5 billion on the death penalty since 1977. And if you were a supporter of the death penalty, you'd say, what did you get for your $5 billion? You got 13 executions, right? That is not a good trade-off. And the system is so bogged down in legal process, and what we are paying for are lawyers and court hearings and just a lot of process that even someone who was a supporter of the death penalty, you have to acknowledge you're not getting anything out of it like what you expected. No one thinks it's working. Now, the proponents of the death penalty, they did their own initiative, and they claimed their initiative was going to fix everything. And their initiative passed by a very small amount in 2016. So their initiative has been law for 9 years, and it's only gotten worse. So 9 years since they tried to fix everything and told us they had the solution to make the death penalty work, it has cost more money. Every day it costs more money. Executions are not proceeding. They're no closer to proceeding, not just because of the moratorium, but because of all the legal problems and the practical problems. And they had their chance to fix it, and it is a continued failure. And it's just a pure waste of money in California.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, and again, I'll step aside if other people raise their hands. The points you were just making, that was Prop 66, that was the competing proposal to give people a choice to vote against abolition, as if Prop 66 would solve everything. Are you aware of any studies, systematic studies? Because I think you've hit on something. Pro-death penalty folks, well, first of all, they've had their chance since the death penalty was reinstated in 76, but now they've had a renewed chance in the last 9 years to fix this thing. So I think that's a powerful argument for practical people who are concerned about finance or budgets, as well as the efficiency of the system. So are you aware, has any academic or any other public interest group looked at all of the procedural quagmire and that Prop 66 created, as well as the extra expense?
I don't know of a study that's focused specifically on that lens of let's just look at Prop 66. So I think, Steve, if you're looking for a new article to write, that could be a good one for you. I will say some sources, the Committee on Revision of the Penal Code, they did a comprehensive study of the death penalty. They're the most recent one. I think their study was 2022. So they have just kind of everything with the death penalty. It touches a little bit on Prop 66, doesn't take that specific kind of focus. And then the other big source is that the Habeas Corpus Resource Center, they are one of the agencies that represents people sentenced to death. And by state law, they're required to produce a report each year. And their annual report is available on their website. Their annual report really lays out the problems with the system from a legal perspective, right? Lack of access to counsel, failure to appoint counsel. So those are probably your two best sources as a starting place. But I think it'd be great, Steve, if you could package something on, particularly if we get to next year, 10 years into props, we're almost at 10 years to Prop 66, but even 9 years of Prop 66, here's how it's made the system worse. And they have had their chance and it failed.
What was the second group that does an annual report?
The Habeas Corpus Resource Center. Here, I'll put the name in the chat here.
Oh, I know. The California Supreme Court. How can you assess their views on the death penalty, the 1-year delay in deciding whether to take this racial injustice attack on the death penalty, and really, are there 4 votes on that court to support universal clemency?
Yeah, so our assessment is there's 7 justices. 6 of them were appointed by either Governor Brown or Governor Newsom, meaning 6 of the 7 were appointed by governors who were very strongly against the death penalty. And we know those justices were, in some sense, vetted for their views on the death penalty. That said, the court still affirms and leaves in place the majority of the death penalty cases it reviews. So it's not a radically anti-death penalty court. Our assessment based on the individuals is that we have 2 justices who we can solidly count on, and those are Goodwin Liu and Justice Evans, who are the most likely to dissent in criminal cases and death penalty cases specifically, and have been very strong advocates for the Equal Protection Clause and the Racial Justice Act. So we're confident we have those 2. We assume that we do not have Justice Corrigan, the lone Republican appointee, so we write her off. Justice Guerrero, who's the chief, is relatively conservative, and so we don't trust that we have her vote. And so that leaves the mushy middle. We have, what's the math there? 3 justices who are really the deciders, right? Those are Justices Jenkins, Kruger, and Groban. We know all 3 of them are personally against the death penalty. We know that. We feel it's pretty likely that those 3 would support the governor on universal clemency. That kind of action, again, it's the governor's action. The court has limited role of review. We think it's unlikely that those 3 justices would stop the governor from doing something that is traditionally executive power, right? That would be a bold action to say no to the governor. So that's why we believe we have 5 justices who are supportive of universal clemency, at least in theory. There's a lot of legal issues and specifics, but that's why we're optimistic. But on the Supreme Court challenge, the court has sat on it for over a year. And so the people who are more experienced than me in reading the tea leaves basically say there must be some undecidedness among those 3 justices, right? We probably have 2 solidly with us. We probably have 2 solidly against us, but we have 3 justices who are probably don't know what to do. Probably in their heart, they probably want to go in our direction, but they're not there 100% legally. Maybe they're feeling nervous politically. It's really about those 3 justices and reading the tea leaves there.
And didn't Attorney General Bonta, who is supposed to defend statutes when they are challenged, file a brief that outlined the flaws in the death penalty, and didn't Governor Newsom weigh in? Correct me, how has that been going?
So the Attorney General's response on the Supreme Court challenge was, it was somewhat helpful, I'll say. He didn't like throw in the towel. He didn't walk in and say, yes, grant this, I hate the death penalty. He didn't go that far. But Attorney General Bonta's response to the Supreme Court challenge, which is based on racial bias and racial discrimination and how the death penalty is applied, the Attorney General's response was to say, this is very concerning. And if the facts are true and if the studies hold up, then this may be a violation of the Constitution. He didn't go so far as to say yes, but he did say the court needs to take this case and needs to decide this, because this is a very important issue and the facts as presented are very concerning, and the court should not ignore if there is racial bias in the death penalty. You should decide this case. So they're not entirely saying we agree, but they are encouraging the case to move forward. And then Governor Newsom, he has not weighed in on this particular case, but he did file an amicus brief in a different Supreme Court case that got denied a few years ago. The governor filed a very lengthy amicus brief saying, I believe the death penalty is unconstitutional, and lifting up racial bias as the reason why he thinks the death penalty is unconstitutional. So that's not in front of them on this case, but the justices know his position from the previous filing.
And my final question, in the universal clemency process before the Supreme Court, will there be any opportunity? I gather the governor presents the motion to that court, so that would be supported by the governor's office, the attorney general. Will there be any opportunity for amicus briefs or public comment as well?
There won't be public comment, but what happens in these cases is that parties send in unsolicited letters. So officially there's no briefing process. So officially they're not amicus briefs, but we do anticipate that the opposition will send in letters, and that we will organize to have letters come in from organizations, particularly legal scholars, in support. The court may or may not consider them, but we will have a process to send them in. It won't be public comment, and it won't be like general everybody mass letters, but it will be a little bit more like an amicus brief strategy of, let's get some letters of support arguing that the governor is acting within his authority, with some influential groups, scholars, et cetera, signing on.
Well, I'm going to turn this back to Carol Francis, but I just want to thank you. I could tell from the questions and the reactions of people, we've learned so much today. I'm pleased to say that a year ago, Death Penalty Focus honored Natasha Minsker with the 2024 Abolition Award, and it was George Gascon, sitting DA, who presented that award, and it was an extraordinary evening, but well-deserved, Natasha. I think it's perfectly obvious now to everybody here and everybody seeing this recording that you are doing serious, compassionate, strategic work. And that is why, as this group knows, I am making you a card-carrying member of ICUJP. Your lifetime dues are fully paid. You know that we will stand shoulder to shoulder in this campaign and in all of the work you're doing, that ICUJP is a link to a lot of faith communities, and we will continue and redouble our efforts in standing in solidarity with you.
Well, thank you, Steve. Thank you all. Thank you for all the work you do for justice, and it's such a great community you have all here coming together. And I just appreciate how much time you have spent with me and everything you do to fight for justice for all people. So thank you.
Thank you, Carol Francis. for leading us through. Thank you, Chris, in absentia. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. And thank you, Natasha, so much for being with us. Join us next week for the program that Don described. You'll get your announcement. Do something good, do something kind, do something for peace and justice this coming week.